are now watching The Boom Show, where I interview authors, educators, thought leaders, and inspiring people with amazing stories that they had to overcome obstacles and turn those obstacles into opportunities for success. My name is Rahz, the author of Student Success Secrets: Unlock the 7 Secrets for Developing Inspired, Motivated, Success-Driven Teens. On today's show, we have an amazing individual. He's one of my closest friends in the world. His name is Ankur Chablani, and he's a former New York City teacher for over 10 years in the game, inspiring, motivating, and teaching our youth, the future leaders of America. And more importantly, I want to share with you, this guy is studying for his Ph.D. right now, but he is way more than that. A personal trainer, a massage therapist, and he is a yoga extraordinaire. This man can do it all, but more importantly, he has a huge, huge heart. I'm excited for this interview. If this is the first time you've watched the show, please make sure to subscribe, like, leave any comments, because we really appreciate your time and your feedback. More importantly, let's get into today's interview with Ankur. I can't wait, as you can see. Boom! What's up, everybody? This is Coach Rahz, aka The Motivator, and we are back with another episode of The Boom Show, building open-minded, optimistic, and motivated teens. Today's guest is Ankur Chablani. He's a former teacher and one of my best friends. Ankur, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing really well. I just did some exercise outdoors, got to breathe some fresh air. I'm oxygenated and ready for action.
Absolutely. So we're going to jump right in, man. I want you just to give the viewers a little bit of your background. I know that you grew up on Long Island, but I'd like you to share with this audience just a little bit of some of the things that you had to overcome as an adolescent as we go through the story and we get to the point where we land this plane and you tell everybody about your teaching experience and what you're currently doing in your life.
Okay, so I immigrated to this country when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And I immigrated from Kuwait. I was born in India, and immigrated to Floral Park Memorial, the Floral Park School District. So, it was my first time in America, in American school system, and it was challenging. The immigration process was challenging. I was, I think, one of 2 Indians in my grade, no Asian, maybe one half, and no Black kids, and maybe a handful of Hispanic kids. So mostly white population, and that had some issues. There was a lot of kind of like racism and bullying, and this is back in the late 80s to early 90s. So a lot of this language around cultural sensitivity just wasn't available yet. So it was challenging. It was challenging to move through the system. I know that in our pre-conversation, you mentioned a little bit about tracking. So I'll tie that in. It was interesting because I came in as a really far ahead in the STEM subjects, math and science. And at that time in life, technology wasn't really much of a thing, but so math and science, and I was really remedial in English, so I had come to this country from an English-speaking school, so I had some basics, but the reality was that I was speaking a different language at home. I was speaking Hindi at home, and English was sort of a second language. So I was in this really like remedial track for reading when I got here. And, now when I look back at it, currently I'm getting my doctorate to become a clinical psychologist. So now I've really started looking at things from a mental health lens, and also a psychopathology lens, so I am sort of like retroactively diagnosing myself a lot of times about things that I might have gone through. Like, what if I had a special ed department? What if I had intelligence testing? What if I had personality testing? What if anxiety, trauma were things that were talked about? I do think that I would have had some kind of IEP because my sister didn't have the same reading problems that I did, but for some reason I did. I'm not sure what those are. So currently I think maybe some kind of definitely some attention issues, which is why personal training made such a good fit for us back in the day, So those were my earliest challenges. Yeah. And then just kind of crawling out of that, I was small, I was skinny, I was Indian, I had a different name, I was brown and everybody else was white. And yeah, it was challenging. It was definitely challenging.
what were some of the things that you had to adapt to in order to overcome those? Because like, I know you personally, but I went to an all Caucasian school as well. And sometimes I noticed it and sometimes I didn't because I just kind of put it away and tried not to focus on that. But you were coming home to a very cultured family and then going into school. Were your family kind of embraced with the community?
Um, our family made their own community, and it was a tight-knit little Indian immigrant community. My dad was in the pharmaceutical industry, and he worked in hospitals, and a lot of the young medical interns at the time were Indians from the Caribbean, from India, from different places, and they made a small, tight-knit community. We had zero friendships with the community that we lived in, not our neighbors, not people from school. It was just immigrants. Our home life was extremely religious, traditional. So, I basically existed in a fractured state all the time, like where I would step in the door and I put on my Indian hat, and then I would go into the school system. And then every once in a while, especially in the early years, I would have like glitches, where I would talk in an Indian accent in school or say a word a certain way in school that I would say at home. And then, I would immediately get negative feedback from my peers for that, and just corrected myself. This is a stupid example that's coming to mind is, in India, we call it shorts knickers. So, I remember going to school in gym class and being like, where do we change into our knickers, and I don't think I heard the end of it for a week. It was just like lots of, so you adapt, you learn, and you figure out what is kosher and what is not kosher. But on a deeper level, I think that this identity formation is such an important part of human development through childhood, through adolescence, through adulthood. And to have two identities that you're straddling, it's hard enough in that age to just form an identity, much less to be toggling back and forth, every day. So it did create a little bit of an identity crisis. Who am I? And that's a whole journey in and of itself, which is more tied into my spiritual path.
One of the things that I wanted to hit with this interview was that I know that a lot of kids, they go home and they have no support. They have no one that they can share their pain, their trauma, what's going on at school. And being a teacher, I know a lot of your students, I'm sure, came to you and shared some of this with you. Can you think back to a time where you were having these types of just challenges at school? Were you able to come home and get some advice or get some kind of strategies from your parents?
No, not really. It's also been a journey to forgiving my parents because they were in an immigrant experience. And now in retrospect, when I talk to, some of the research that I've been doing for my doctoral studies is family lifespan development research. And some of the, I have all these research subjects around me, which are my family that are immigrants. And I would just talk to them about their experiences, and the hardships that were revealed in those interviews were very therapeutic for me because it helped me to go back and look at my parents and say they were knee deep in the immigrant experience as much as us. Uh,
Yes.
so so the short answer is no, I didn't really have anybody to talk to. It was also traditionally Indian men don't emote and don't talk to their sons and stuff like that. It's just about, I think there's a disconnect that happening. I don't want to disparage the collectivist Indian culture because it's a really beautiful thing, but I think the values work when you have a network or a web of relationships in the village, in the community, in the neighborhood. So then it doesn't become so critical for a parent to every day unpack a kid's experiences. They have a village. It takes a village to raise. That's where that comes from, right? So my parents, they brought a collectivistic mindset, and we were injected into a hostile individualistic world. So they didn't know how to talk to us about that, and they didn't even know it was happening. And I didn't know that my parents were having all this trauma at work and in the community and whatnot. So yeah, we were survival mode. It was fight or flight mode. It wasn't like this nice like dinner table, let's talk about whatever. It was a kind of a fight to survive. Sports was a big protective factor for me. In psychology, we call protective factors anything that is keeping you afloat when everything else seems like it's really bad and really hard. So for me, a protective factor was athletics. It provides in American culture a degree of social acceptance, and B, it's a mindfulness activity where you literally are, you're decompressing, right? I mean, the endorphins, it's the endocrinological response, it's the social response, it's belonging to something. So that was a big help for me, and you know, and I continued doing that as I got older. I just kind of found men that I could look up to. Sometimes I was lucky enough to have a close relationship with them. Sometimes I wasn't. And actually part of the work that I do, right now I'm doing mindfulness based therapy for kids. And one of the visualizations, meditations that I often do as a healing tool for trauma, isolation, abandonment is I have people imagine the men. There's like all the men that have been in their life that are great. It could be a fictional character, it could be a comic book character, it could be, because it's a visualization, especially for a young kid. And I have them imagine sitting in a circle as if you do in a real men's circle. And now you're getting into circle work yourself. You're seeing the power of it. And I would have them imagine this and then put affirmations in each one of their mouths. So you hash out all the affirmations and you hash out these characters. I would do almost like a 20 minute interview before even doing this visualization, where I'd just be like, tell me about that character. What does he do? What is he strong with? And then once I have I take notes and I have all this data in front of me about these characters and what their attributes are, then you close your eyes and we start the visualization. And then I give each one of those characters an affirmation that's unique to their personality and the connection that the person feels with it. You just meditate, visualize, you go around the circle. And it's a way to, like I said, piecemeal that message when you don't necessarily have that message. So
that's really powerful, man. I actually use something like that in my practice, which is called the circle of excellence. And all it really is you pulling in all of the different resources you need in this kind of visualized circle. And anytime you need to pull that up and get that strength, you can trigger yourself to go back into the circle. So that's beautiful. Ankur, you mentioned protective factors, which I'd never heard of. And I can tell you just from my own experiences in life, I used these, as well as reached out to mentors that some were real, some were made up, some were in books and tapes. But as a parent watching this, how can they witness when their kid is using a protective factor and maybe kind of step in if they're both there or one of them is there and say, hey, I can give you some help? How can they notice this type of behavior?
Well, first thing I noticed in your language, you said how to use a protective factor. So I just want to make a distinction. I want to make sure that we're not conflating defense mechanisms and protective factors.
Okay.
So a defense mechanism is something that you might use or employ to get through something, and a protective factor is just something that is available. It's available already. And there is some overlap there, like maybe like humor. Humor is a defense mechanism, but humor could also be a protective factor. If you're just the guy that everyone loves talking to because you make them laugh, then that creates a community, and that community is your protector. Right. There's some overlap there, but there's also a distinction. So the protective factors are, just things that are working for you, things that are working in your environment, if you are, let's say, part of a really pro-social, proactive, healing-based school community that does a lot of social emotional education, social emotional development, that's a protective factor. You're like, oh, like my home life was really rough, but I went to this school every day and it lifted me up. That's a protective factor. Like the other example I gave is like, I'm a good athlete, so playing sport, getting acceptance there, the sports community was one of my protective factors. Yeah.
Are there negative? Yeah, absolutely. Are there negative protective factors?
I don't think so. I think the word is pretty much used in the psychology world to talk about things that are contrary to trauma, contrary to negative experiences. Yeah, things that support mental health, I would say.
Awesome. So you as a teacher, can you just take us back to your, I mean, I remember we met and we were both personal trainers, and I remember this evolution of you deciding to make this decision. You were going to go serve, and you were really steadfast on making a change. Tell us about the first couple of years of your experience as a teacher in New York City.
Well, so interestingly, I got my master's to become a teacher at Hofstra University. I did that while we were training together at Equinox. And when I finished that program, I was doing my student teaching at Herrick's High School. And it just so happened that the woman that I was shadowing, being mentored by, doing my student teaching with, happened to be retiring that year. And she was an earth science teacher, and I was finishing that year. So I was ready to enter the workforce. She was leaving the workforce. I could have just slid right into that community. And I don't know, something inside of me. And at one point, I think she sat down and talked to me, and she was just like, you don't really seem like you're that into it here. And I wasn't, because there was just something that was calling me. So very interestingly, I decided to go into the New York City Department of Education, and I did it for a very kind of superficial reason. I was young, and I was like, I want to be in the city because I like to party in the city. So I want my network to be city. I don't want to be with suburbia kind of thing, like families, older people. I wanted more of a young vibe. So I went to the New York City Department of Education, and the first interview that I had, the very first interview that I had was in Corona, Queens, which is where my family had their beginnings in America, in the Left Rock Towers. The Left Rock Towers, during the crack epidemic, it got a little dicey. We had a lot of incidents and situations that my parents could tell you about, or my grandparents could tell you about if they were alive. And it just called to me. So I was working with Corona, Queens. I call it the Ellis Island. This school, I-61, I call it the Ellis Island of the New York City Department of Education, because new immigrants were just pouring into the school, and the school was busting at the seams. So I went for that interview. I got offered a job right on the interview, and I didn't go to a second interview. I just accepted the job right there, because it felt like I was kind of coming full circle in a way. Prior to that experience, when I was in my master's, I was also doing a lot of personal work, a lot of group therapy through some organizations. And then I had also gone to massage therapy school and did some teaching there in my mid-20s. So I brought in this circle process, which was something that was like very kind of new agey at worst, at best, sorry, maybe just completely inappropriate for a teacher or school setting at worst. But I brought in this thing, and I brought it intuitively, because those are my therapy experiences. And I was like, oh, I had a good therapy experience, I'm going to pass it forward, and as these things often work. And then in the very beginning, my teachers did not like that. My administrators did not like that. So they pulled me aside. I had a conversation with the guidance counselor. I had a conversation with my assistant principal, and the conversations were usually to the effect of like, you're not part of the mental health team. You're a teacher. Teach science. Stop doing all this funny therapy stuff. I did not stop doing the funny therapy stuff because, as you know, from my personality, I was always kind of a little bit of a rebel, like an intellectual rebel, but still a rebel. And I was just like, I'd rather lose my job than to ignore the need. And again, this is before, now what I was doing would be called trauma-informed pedagogy. It has all these things. This is before anybody was really doing that in the public school system, much less in the New York City Department of Education. And I used to get in trouble for it. Yeah, it was a problem. It was a problem. And I remember I would do circles in class, and I would put chart paper on the windows of the doors, so the administrators wouldn't come. Eventually, the kids started buying in, and they loved it, so they became part of like my lookout. If they would, if somebody was coming, they'd put the chart paper on, they put the chart paper off. Like we had like a little system, so we could have our community circles every week or every month or whatever the frequency was. I left that school. That school had a very punitive discipline model. The New York City Department of Education has a discipline code that they follow. But that code can be interpreted different ways. When I left the DOE, which was about 3 years ago, they had made amendments in that code where they had put in some restorative like principles. But the totality of the code, even the presence of that code, it's all very punitive, So I left that school because I just didn't want to, I was gonna try to transition to a dean role, which is like a disciplinary figure in the school, handle suspensions and whatnot. And when I was applying for that, another assistant principal pulled me aside and he said, "Just so you know, if you get this job, you have to do things by the code, our way, and not in your your own little remixed kind of way." So that to me was a messaging that said time to go. And I moved on to a new school. I continued with my circle work. That was a high school. It was really rough. That was in Van Buren in Queens Village. The kids did not buy in. The team did not buy in. And it was a really, really rough environment. So they had it was a new school, so they had a bunch of money for different things, and they had just hired were consulting with this agency, Partnership for Children or something like that, and they had experts that came in, and they were restorative justice experts. So I was doing my circle, and they were walking through the school, and at one point they kind of like they said to the principal, they said, who's that? We didn't know you had restorative justice in your school. And she was like, we don't. And then they called me after my class was over, and I thought I was in trouble again because this is my traumatic experiences,
Exactly.
So I'm going to the principal's office, like high school PTSD, class school teaching PTSD, I'm just like, I'm going to the principal's office. I'm in trouble. And there's a couple of guys in suits there too. I'm probably in big trouble,
Yep.
But it was completely different. I got into that meeting and they said, who trained you in restorative justice practices? And I said, nobody, like I don't even know what restorative justice is. I'm just I'm doing things that I think that I would have needed. I did these therapeutic things. They were really good for me in my massage school, and I want to bring it to mainstream education. So I got trained. I became a certified circle keeper, restorative justice specialist. I didn't really care about the restorative justice in general, and not to disparage the program. It's a beautiful program. But with personal training, this from the fitness industry, whether it's personal training or teaching yoga or doing healing work, I feel like each one of us has an eclectic conglomeration of qualities and experiences. And I think that it behooves us to make something our own, to make it our own. As opposed to being like, okay, this kid said this. Well, I don't know what to say. Let me go find the restorative justice book and see what I'm supposed to say to that,
Right.
And what ends up happening, especially with inner city kids, especially in the trauma environments, is if you don't have that alliance, that relationship, if they don't sense that you're authentically there with them. I mean, what my experience of inner city schools was that like the test scores were low, but the emotional intelligence was off the charts, previously known as street smarts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they could see a person coming a mile away. And the teachers that were successful were not necessarily people of color, were not necessarily people who, were from the same neighborhood. It was really people who were just authentic and comfortable in themselves and were just listening and seeing the people in front of them.
A word from our sponsor. As a parent, it is emotionally draining to see your child suffering from low self-esteem, lacking confidence, and social skills. Rahz and Michelle Slaughter's book, Student Success Secrets, unlock the 7 secrets for developing inspired, motivated, success-driven teens is a must-read book for every emerging teenager. Purchase a copy today at rahzslaughter.com or amazon.com. That is just so deep there. I love, and it leads to my next question, because I mean, the work you were doing, you went from the gut, you kind of was on the edge, then you found like someone saw, wow, this guy is really a talent. We can utilize him to really bring something to the school and the community. And then you, again, you know, you get to a point where it's like you're still pushing on walls. I've got the opportunity to interview and speak to a lot of teachers. And one of the words that resonates with them a lot is, I found myself burnt out.
Mhm.
And would you mind just speaking a little to that? Because I'm sure you saw a lot of different teachers and educators who were really good, who had the hustle like that you have to stick it out and stay there and do it. But when they ran up against the wall, they rather go, you know what, I could go make more money doing this, or I could go do more something doing that, rather than keep running up against the wall. What would you tell someone like that?
Okay, so I've actually done PDs for educators on burnout, and I think there's a couple of factors that cause burnout. I don't think it's one factor. Um, so the trainings that I normally do are based on secondary trauma, or another name of it is vicarious trauma. Um, Secondary trauma, vicarious trauma just means that when you work with people who have a lot of trauma, that it comes up inside of you as well. There's different ways of looking at that, you know. Like the studies that I'm doing right now in psychology, it's like, if you have a therapist or you have a teacher, you're going to project a lot of things on them, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I have a teacher and he may be something similar to a father figure, so I project the paternal thing. You may have a white teacher who sees a black kid that maybe looked like somebody that robbed him when he was a kid or she was a kid, and they project that on him. Like, there's all these projections that are going back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
for better or worse. And you know, when you're working with kids that have trauma, a lot of times, and intuitively, a lot of inner city teachers know this, is that they test you, and they have like these sayings like, don't smile until Christmas, as a teacher, to like to show that you're serious or whatever. I always thought that was bullshit, but that's for my personality, that's for for some other people that might work. For me, I would just be really nice from the beginning. But going back, I digress. The secondary trauma is like, so if I work with a kid and he's traumatized and he sees me and I trigger him in whatever way, because we'll trigger our students at one point or another, right? Same thing with our teenagers. When you're working with whether your own kids, you're working with other people's kids, at some point, once you get past the nice, the honeymoon phase, or the distrust phase, you're going to start projecting a lot of your stuff onto that person. And here's where it gets tricky. The person, if a student is projecting something on me, I have to survive that in that moment. Okay. That's a psychoanalytic term, to survive that. If I survive that moment, then this kid has created a new template for how he relates to adults. Because when the thing with kids that are in trauma is, when a kid is being neglected or abused, they don't think to themselves, my parents are going through a tough time or anything like that. They don't think about their parents' trauma. They don't think about their parents' inability to serve them. They internalize it completely differently, and they say, I'm unworthy of love. Not that my father or mother is failing in loving me. They're going to say, I'm unworthy of love. So when you're in that environment and all of a sudden a kid projects all that unworthiness on you, fear, pain, trauma, unworthiness on you, and you survive that moment because you don't have any guilt. You're not the one who let them down. Maybe if they do that at home, their parents, like, they either ignore them or they just do this over the top punishment reaction, hitting, ignoring, yelling. As a teacher, you just find that middle ground. You just hold space. Okay. So once you're able to survive that moment, you give this kid a new template in their brain for what's possible in relationships. And that's an ideal thing. And then they develop something called object constancy, and it's all beautiful and blah, blah, blah. Here's where it gets messy. You project on me and I'm having a bad day. I have too much administrative pressure. I'm just not myself because I'm a little sick. I have my own projections about this kid, how he looks, what he's capable of. This is why a lot of Black boys get pathologized in school, because of what they evoke in people. And what they evoke is not danger. I don't look at a small Black kid and say, this is dangerous, but maybe I have an experience that I'm projecting onto that kid, and all of a sudden he becomes dangerous, and I punish him twice as hard for something, you know, because he's bad already because of my experience in the past. So then when all this stuff gets mixed into the pot, then you have these really explosive interactions between students and teachers. Trust breaks down. And yeah, so ideally, ideally you survive, like I said, those moments, but that's not always how it goes down. And when that happens, the more times teachers are going through this experience, I mean, you better clear that. You better have a therapist, you better have a spiritual practice, you better have a supportive partner at home, and you better have some way to clear that. Because if you don't clear that, that accrues inside of you. And as it accumulates, you get closer and closer to that burnout, at the end of, up until every vacation, up until the end of every year, up until certain points in people's career, there are these markers where you just know that burnout is coming, and you can see it coming. It's so that's one side of it. That's a very relational, interpersonal explanation. And then the other explanation is just simply teachers are asked to do too much these days. It's like I'm gonna just take a veer and put a plug in for police officers, because I feel so bad about how they've been just hammered lately, and as a public school teacher, I really empathize with that. And I've always been part of the defund the police movement, which I think is a terrible name for it. I think it should be bolster the police, support the police, give them more resources so they don't have to wear 5 different hats to every call. Same thing with public school teachers, so if you give and now they're doing that. The schools have more social workers, guidance counselors, like they're pumping money to social and emotional education. And now all of a sudden, again, like I said, I went from goat to guru, like now people are paying me a prime rate to go into school and do these trainings, teach circle work, talk about just this conversation, this trauma conversation, bring people's awareness to it,
So I love that answer gives me clarity, and I'm sure the audience who's going to watch this gets a little bit of a different view, especially since you not only you spent over 10 years in the trenches, so you got to see that hands-on. Now, I really loved, I want to just switch gears a little bit because you mentioned social emotional learning, and it's a buzzword. A lot of schools are doing it, but I've been doing some research, and what I'm finding is that although schools are getting funding for it, a lot of teachers that I've interviewed, and for my book as well, I got the chance to interview, it's not really transitioning into the students because there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of, you got to do it this way. And you were a rebel and you found the way to just interject it. I know I got to be in your class and see what that type of conversation and the way you spoke to your students. Can you just speak on that a little bit, the importance of social emotional learning, and to your expertise and your opinion, when do you think we should start to put this into schools and how do we get it out? That's a 3-part question. I can answer the other 2 if you forget them.
Where to start? First, I'll talk about, and this is related to my previous conversation, to burnout, is I think one of the main reasons that social emotional education is not really gaining a lot of traction is because there's not a lot of buy-in from teachers. And now this is not to disparage teachers in any way. Teachers are doing God's work, and they are sacred beings, for what they do. But they're asked to do too much, and they're asked to wear too many hats. And when, there's so many things that come down, politics from the political level, bureaucracy, things like, Obama will get into office and say race to the top. George Bush goes to office, no child left behind. They have these buzzwords, they have these programs that sometimes I feel like are more about getting reelected or getting elected, and less about what's actually best. Or it's a good program and it's the best of intentions, and as it trickles down from its conception on a piece of paper with some minds in a room, and it trickles down and trickles down and trickles down and trickles down until it finally reaches the individual student in a school, it's become a perversion of itself, kind of like the game of telephone or something. because it's had to go through a lot of levels, and in those levels are humans who are scared about losing their job.
Yes,
and they have their own trauma, and they're taking it out on the people that are their subordinates. You know, great leadership is hard to find in any sector, forget about education. So so as it gets distilled and distilled and distilled, it changes. And so I think that's one of the reasons that it doesn't come very pure. I think this has to be more of a grassroots thing. And that was my purpose in school, of just being like, you care about your kids, I care about my kids, you care about your kids. Let's create a coalition and take our 3 classes here. And then if the principal sees that, then we'll go to the principal and be like, hey, this program worked. Let's do this with one sector of the school, half of it. You build it up like that. And the problem, and it gains more traction that way, because when things are coming down from top, there, teachers are asked all the time, I need a data report, I need your lesson plans, I need this, I need that, I need you to do hall duty today, I need you to do cafeteria duty, I need you to coach this sport, I need you to have this conversation with parents. It's just like need. So then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I want you to go to a training for restorative justice or for anti-bullying work or whatever. It just kind of like gets lost in the noise. It gets diluted by all the other asks, and people don't even see its purpose. Mm. And even if they do see their purpose, they do see what they have to do and how important it is, and they buy in completely. They may not have time because they have X, Y, and Z to do. And X, Y, and Z is part of their teacher evaluation. So they better get that done. And this little extra thing is not. Gotcha. So I think that is being empathetic towards the teacher experience. And then to be a little bit critical about it too, is that people have a tough time changing their practices. People have a tough time changing their ways. People don't want to invest more than they're doing already a lot of times. And my experience with trying to train teachers in restorative justice and circle work, and seeing the lack of buy-in and seeing the eye rolls and the comments about the kids, it was very hurtful to me to see that. And I think the problem is that teachers, a lot of times, they see this kind of stuff as more content instead of understanding that it's context. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to stop doing anything differently. Like one example is, like, I used to do circles, and sometimes I would teach my lesson in a circle. One time I did a physics lesson on potential energy and kinetic energy, and we started that conversation by talking about human potential. And we started because this is following the Bloom's taxonomy, which is a formula for asking questions with increasing complexity based on who's in front of you. So in Bloom's taxonomy, critical thinking, higher level thinking questions come last. So sometimes I would do a round where we would just like check in, and then we do another round where we talk about potential and kinetic energy. And then I would be like, how does this concept apply to human potential? And then they would have to take the physics concept and they would have to apply it to, their own life. And the hope is that maybe it sticks. So what I did is, we were talking about potential energy, kinetic energy, like every intro physics teacher will always talk about, but we added a social emotional component to it. Or better yet, the social emotional component was the context with which we taught that subject. And if people start seeing it that way, then it's not going to be more work. It's actually less work, because you're getting buy-in, you're getting community, you're getting cooperation. So, yeah.
That's great. I mean, right now what I do, and trying to get myself into schools to mix social emotional learning through my storytelling of having my struggles and things like that, and other people's struggles, because I find that children really learn well when they can connect a story. Does your child lack confidence, social skills, or motivation? Rahz Slaughter is a sought-after teen life coach, motivational speaker, and 20-year professional coach. He welcomes the opportunity to coach your team on a one-on-one basis or as one of his students in his online groups. Rahz's coaching system will help your teen boost their confidence, improve their communication skills, and gain clarity about who they are and how they can reach their full potential in school, sport, and life. To learn more about the coaching programs or to schedule a consultation, consultation, call 1-800-509-9383 or visit us at our website at rahzslaughter.com. If you mention the Boom Show, you'll receive 10% off the coaching program that you enroll your child. One of the things in my research, Ankur, I've seen is that the diversity in education and the sex, the male, female, as well as the ethnic background isn't really balanced. Would you like to just talk a little bit about that? Because what I found is that a lot of the teachers are female Caucasian and male Caucasian, but the challenge is a lot of the students in these Title I's and underprivileged, under-resourced schools aren't that. So how are these kids going to connect with these people who live a different life, but yet come to school and try to really build rapport and build a relationship? It's a really hard thing, in my opinion. What do you see?
So yeah, I mean, I think it's hugely important for kids to have role models and to see people who are, who are the same, that look the same as them, and then they get this idea that maybe I could look like that. Representation is really important in media, in schools, and all that stuff. But also, I want to really emphasize what I said earlier is that I've seen people. Like there were some teachers in my last school that it was in Bed-Stuy, like border of Bed-Stuy, Brownsville, which is kind of a rough part of Brooklyn. And I remember that they had some people that came in that were from the community. And I found that kids were very combative with that person. And they had other people who you would, think like, you're like, oh, this person is going to get eaten alive in this school. And they didn't, and they had amazing outcomes. So I think that it's important for kids to have definitely a role model that looks similar to them. But at the end of the day, having somebody who cares about them, who attunes to their needs, who survives them and maintains their center through it and overcomes all those difficulties. Because what happens in inner city schools is that the word gets around. Okay, the kids are going to test you at first. They're going to see if you can survive, and then they notice that you help one kid through a crisis, and then they'll be like, "Yo, I had a similar problem like that. Go talk to Mr. Chablani and see if he'll help you, bro. He's cool. Trust me, he's cool. So you go and you get the second kid comes to you, and then you help them work that out. And I was a science teacher, so I wasn't a dean, I wasn't a guidance counselor, I wasn't a social worker, I wasn't an administrator. I had no access to these kids' private lives except for interest and care. And what I end up finding out, the schools that really worked well with me, they saw my talent and they looped me in. So they were like, okay, this kid has a rapport with you, you're the point person on this case, even though you're a science teacher. Having the restorative justice specialist title helped, because everybody likes that title, they like that check, But what ended up happening was the schools that were threatened by that, like my very first school, they were trying to, cut me from that and keep me away from it and threatening me with disciplinary measures. And eventually the ones that were more successful, they would be like, okay, this kid has a rapport with this person, it takes a village. This person knows something about, we're going to access that knowledge, we're going to leverage that relationship and help the kid. So what I found was that schools that had camaraderie and community amongst teachers, and the teachers really cared, and there was a lot of interaction, small group interactions with adults, those were the most important things, I thought, rather than, I want to say, like, white teachers or brown teachers or whatever. That's my experience.
Awesome. I love that. That was a great answer. It helped me a lot, because a lot of times I can tell you that in my experience, when I went to school, I never really trusted teachers. And the reason I didn't trust teachers is that I was afraid to tell them the truth. The type of personality that I had, I didn't want my home life to be broadcast or known. So, and I would look towards someone who was a little bit more like you, or that spoke to me in a language that wasn't so over my head. And it's like, hey, come here, let's holler at me for a minute. That would have really broken and built the trust, as opposed to I never got that. And I think a lot of students, and some of the ones that I've actually had the opportunity to connect with, after I speak, They don't raise their hand during my speech or when I ask for questions. Soon as the mic drops, they come over to the side and they tell me because there's something I said that resonated with their own personal story. So, I mean, I get that, brother. Well, we're going to land this plane. This has been amazing, and I really appreciate your time. But what I want you to do right now with this last segment is just kind of look into the camera and tell people, you know, these are going to be parents, educators, you know, where schools have been, where it's going. What do you see the future in education now that we're coming out of a pandemic? And you know, my passion is to inspire and motivate kids. But where do you see education, and what are some things that you would interject now with all of the newfound knowledge that you've actually acquired?
I think that it's every leader, teacher leaders, responsibility, school leader, teachers, parents. It's their responsibility to do work on yourself. You know, to do work on yourself. I think that's really what it comes down to. And I'm not saying that in any kind of righteous or prescriptive way, but I think that, you know, this kind of ties in a lot of the concepts, like we talked about burnout, you know, we talked about what makes effective teacher, how do you survive a kid when they're having their reactions. And I think that there's like this theme that's kind of flowing through this interview and through everything that we've talked about, which is human resilience. Right. So part of your self-care, your self-practice is the key to building resilience. And it's also the key for our students to build resilience. And also we can't teach things that we don't know. Otherwise it's kind of hypocritical, right? So if you want to be role models for self-care, for taking care of your problems in a proactive way, taking care of your health, pausing before you react, thinking, breathing more, reacting less. We have to work on ourselves, and the rest is just content. You know, I mean, that's the context with which we have to work with other humans.
Fantastic, my man. If anyone's watching this, and I know you're not big on, you know, looking to get anything out of this, but if someone wants to reach out to you, connect with you, maybe have you come to their school, where is the best place for them to connect with you?
I mean, email. I'm on LinkedIn. My email, my cell phone. You know, like I'm still just doing word of mouth, talking to education programs, teachers, getting referrals, and going where I'm asked to go. So
absolutely. I'll make sure to link up a lot of that in the description of this video as well. Ankur, man, I want to thank you for your time today, man. It's been enlightening, as always. When I get the opportunity to chop it up with you, I learn a tremendous amount. I took some notes as well. And I just want to thank you, man. I appreciate you as this energy and coming on here for this interview. Thank you, buddy.
No problem. Take care, guys.